Story 1. A friend of mine worked at Red Lobster. A customer ordered a salmon steak. The customer was very upset that he was served fish. Story 2. At a Tex-Mex restaurant, cheese nachos without the chips. They received a plate of shredded cheese microwaved onto a plate. They used the complimentary appetizer chips to eat that cheese. Story 3. Once I had a customer in the drive-thru order a dozen chocolate donuts. Sounds pretty normal, except I worked at Burger King and we did not have chocolate donuts. I asked him to repeat himself, and he confidently said again, "A dozen chocolate donuts." I said, "Sir, we don't have donuts here." He said, "Where am I?" I said, "This is Burger King." Then I heard his wife in the passenger seat start cracking up. He sheepishly said, "I thought this was Tim Hortons," and he sped away. Story 4. Working at the country's best yogurt store, a fancy older gentleman who was Italian and wore gold chains, had a deep tan, an open shirt, and accompanied by an equally fancy lady, asked to buy the painting we had hanging on the wall. This was not a special painting. It was probably what they send to all the country's best yogurt stores when they open. I got my manager, who haggled a bit, and in the end he bought it. They got their frozen yogurt, pulled the painting off the wall, and in the most outrageous Italian accent, he said as he was walking out the door, "When I see something I like, I buy it." I still quote that guy all the time. Story 5. Not a restaurant, but my wife and I owned and ran a bed and breakfast for about 10 years. We served a 3-course breakfast on the weekends and I cooked. One weekend morning, I was making custom omelets to order. One guest asked for her omelet to be cooked without any fat, no oil, no butter, etc., apparently for health reasons. That is pretty difficult to do even with a non-stick pan. At least for me, I don't have any formal food service training. So, I ended up putting a little water in the pan, and it turned out okay. She loved it, and the couple became repeat customers. Whenever they booked, we made omelets. Story 6. A man walked into my small dive bar, sat down, slapped his hands on the bar and said, "Give me the rack of ribs." We do not have a kitchen, have never served food, and certainly do not smoke ribs in the back. Story 7. I went to London with my mother. She asked for ranch dressing at every restaurant every day, just in case the answer would change. After the first few tries, it became clear ranch dressing was not common in London, but some servers had heard of it and said it was on their bucket list to try ranch dressing. Story 8. Pepsi with a glass of water and extra sugar. Watched the guy pour about 5 sugar packets into his Pepsi and many more into the water. What the heck? He worked at a gym. His teeth were completely rotten. Story 9. A guy was walking to our closed upstairs section. I said, "Dude, this area is closed." He said he was meeting someone, and indeed there was a lady upstairs. I told them they needed to leave. They were surprised and offended that our restaurant would not let them just hang out in a closed space. You understand this is a business, right? Apparently not. Story 10. I walked in 5 minutes before closing and ordered the beef Wellington. The server explained that it takes 30 minutes to cook. I said that was fine. Point of advice. If you walk into an empty restaurant at the end of the night and the server mentions a long wait for food, consider reconsidering your order. Everyone wanted to go home except that person. Story 11. I was working at the time. A woman sent her burger back 5 times because it was too rare. She was only satisfied when the patty actually caught on fire on the grill and was broken down into its chemical components. The whole restaurant smelled like a fire, but she was happy as a clam eating it. Story 12. As a flight attendant, tomato juice and orange juice, no ice. I poured both in separate cups and received the nastiest look, as if I was serving them with my fingers sticking in the rims. I was wrong. He wanted airplane temperature warm canned orange juice mixed with tomato juice. No ice. My bad, my fault. Story 13. Coffee. Extra hot. Now, that is something you find at a proper coffee shop where they can adjust temperatures on espresso drinks. Less so for drip coffee, and even less at a burger joint where I worked. I made him a fresh brew, then microwaved it for 60 seconds. Not hot enough. Older people ask for strange things. Do you serve free bread for the table before the meal? It's a burger joint. Story 14. I was working at Trifoni's on New Year's Eve when a group of men came in and ordered sloppy steaks. I had no idea what they were talking about, so I told them we don't have sloppy steaks tonight. They ordered steaks and glasses of water. As I walked away from the table, they started pouring their water on the steaks and laughing. The group seemed very disrespectful. Story 15. I once had a man ask if we could sear the steak rare but without any pink. He wanted cooked blood. I still have nightmares. Story 16. A friend of mine had a customer request chicken head sauce. Eventually, they figured out that the customer was asking for sriracha. Story 17. Overhead. This is Buffalo Wild Wings. Can I get chicken breast cooked in coconut oil and have the oil rinsed off after it is done? I am not even sure how that would have turned out. Story 18. I was eating at a hot pot restaurant when a man came in, asked what hot pot was, and then became incredibly offended when they were not able to offer all-you-can-eat hot pot to go. Story 19. I worked in a reasonably high-end restaurant in Melbourne. One customer assumed the refined atmosphere meant that all of the waitstaff would be fluent in French and placed his order accordingly. It took me by surprise, and being a bit rough at heart, I responded with an abrupt and probably too loud, "Yes," which terrified the poor guy. He did not leave a tip. Story 20. I had a customer when I worked in a pub who ordered a drink that was half Guinness and half cola. Apparently, it was a common drink where she was from in Germany. Story 21. Walked confidently behind the bar and wiped her hands with a bar towel because she did not want to use a paper napkin. Ordered the most expensive single malt scotch mixed with soda. Requested a zero-fat, gluten-free vegan pizza. Requested a complimentary cup of ranch dressing to put on the salad she brought with her from home. Brought 2 slices of bread and some cheese and asked the staff to make him a grilled cheese sandwich. He said he did not need to pay anyone. Ordered water with ice and all the available fruit garnishes. Grabbed the bitters and poured half of the bottle into the water. He did not want to pay for anything. Demanded champagne table service for free after defending his Doctor of Philosophy thesis. He thought the restaurant should charge his professor and advisor afterward. Story 22. A young couple asked me for a bottle of the corkage. A lady pointed to the filet mignon and asked what kind of fish it is. And last, after mentioning a special with polenta, a sweet summer child said, "Polenta? Isn't that like giving birth?" Story 23. I met a man to date his daughter. They had come in the night before and sat in my section. The next morning, before we officially opened, he came in and told me he thought we would be a great match and gave me her number. I am fairly tall and she was too, so I guess that was his reasoning. She is a nice girl, but I never called. I felt it would be too awkward to explain in case her father acted on his own initiative, and she would be mortified. Story 24. I worked at an Italian restaurant called Gusty's Italian Restaurant. Someone came in, looked at the menu, and then asked, "Do you have any Chinese food here?" Story 25. I had a lady ask for the cooks to make her eggs shipwrecked. When I asked what that meant, she did not have a clear answer. She settled on something else, but I still have no idea what she actually wanted. I can only imagine the frustration from the cooks for putting that order through. Does anyone know what that means? I am Canadian, so maybe it is not a Canadian thing or not common in my area. Story 26. Me. Any interest in dessert this evening? Them. Can I get your big plate of cookies? We have never had cookies in 18 years of operation. Story 27. I was a chef in a small restaurant in the 1980s. One of my food representatives came for dinner with her friend. They called me to the table after they ate. The friend confided in me with a straight face that she had ordered a cocktail called Screaming Orgasm from the bar, but she could not seem to finish it and asked if I could help. Story 28. I was a manager in a chain convenience store, and the chain owner had a few D'Angelo sandwich shops. They issued coupons for discounts on D'Angelo-specific sandwiches, but customers sometimes got confused. I was about to leave my non-D'Angelo store one day when one of my employees came to get me to handle a customer complaint. The customer expected us to honor a coupon for pre-made sandwiches from a different vendor. He argued back and forth with me, pretending not to understand, screaming and red-faced over less than $2. I told him, "Sir, you don't understand. This offer is for fresh-made D'Angelo's sandwiches only." He said, "No, you don't understand. You're going to make me a fresh-made D'Angelo's sandwich, or you'll be arrested for false advertising." I sighed and said, "All right, you win," and made him an offer that would have put me in the Malicious Compliance Hall of Fame. I told him I was going to make him a fresh-made D'Angelo's sandwich. I asked for 2 minutes to lock up my office, then I would drive him over to another store, location with a sandwich kiosk, and cook for him. I had worked in that store about 9 years earlier and knew how to cook most of the menu. I locked up my office and pulled my car around, but he refused to get in. I know it was a stupid and unsafe move, and I would never make it today. Story 29. It is not weird, just mispronunciation, but the number of people I have stood behind in Subway who have ordered Chipolata Southwest sauce is large. So many people. Story 30. My ex has eaten in diners her entire life. There are several that we would frequent. Invariably, she would get to the page on burgers and ask for a turkey burger. The waitress would ask, "Regular or deluxe?" My ex would always say, as if it would somehow change, "What comes with deluxe?" This was so common at many places we ate that the waitress and I would say in unison, "Lettuce, tomatoes, and fries." She was always disappointed and would argue that it could mean something else, even though in more than 40 years of life it never has. Story 31. As a teenager, I worked at the Olive Garden. I once had a lady order fettuccine alfredo, but with the red breadstick sauce, not the white sauce. "So you want fettuccine noodles with marinara dipping sauce?" No, it needed to be fettuccine alfredo without the sauce. "Whatever you say, lady." Story 32. Worked at a Coney Island and had a customer ask what the vegetable of the day was. He was not a fan of the answer and left the restaurant. About 30 minutes later, he returned bringing his own can of mixed vegetables and demanded that we cook them for him. Story 33. I used to work at a local place that was mainly a venue for small gigs, but sometimes we had a cafe as well. Everyone there worked non-profit, and the place was non-profit. During the cafe hours, we only had cans of soda, regular coffee, tea, and sometimes a small cookie. It was incredibly cheap, like 0.50 euros for a coffee. One time, a lady came in and thought this must be a Starbucks or something. So she tried to order a non-fat, sugar-free frappuccino and got very angry when told no. Story 34. I used to go to a place in college in the United States that had a soup humorously called dog hair soup. It was unseriously marketed as a hangover remedy. One day, someone ordered the soup and asked, "Now, with the dog hair soup, can I choose the breed of dog in the soup?" Everyone nearby thought he was joking until he got annoyed at their laughter. This person seriously believed the soup was made from dog. Story 35. My ex-mother-in-law has a variant of orthorexia or avoidance/restrictive food intake disorder and limits her diet to many cruciferous vegetables. When eating out, she cannot have oily or fatty foods, although she may ask others for bites of lean meat. This leads her to order items like pizza without sauce and with only green salad-style toppings, essentially loose spinach leaves on bread. Story 36. Worked at a fairly upscale restaurant in a rural area. Customers always tried to sound fancy or better educated. One wanted her food with a side of béarnaise sauce. I will never forget the sous chef complaining about people who learn to be classy from a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Story 37. A friend of mine was a server at a restaurant when she was in college and told me about a regular customer. This customer would ask their server to take a sip from their drink before setting it on the table every time. It seemed harmless, so most obliged. A new server refused and thought they were joking. The customer became angry, stormed out, and was never seen again. Some time later, the customer was found dead in their home from an apparent suicide. It was revealed that they were suffering from severe schizophrenia and were paranoid about being poisoned. This was not the only restaurant where this person had made a reputation for themselves, and it was always the same request for the server to sip from their drink before setting it down. Story 38. Very high-end steakhouse in Las Vegas. The kind where you get the prices by the ounce. We are talking, I could have bought a car for what this meal costs. And the guy asks for ketchup with his steak. I almost slap him right there. The group I was with still talks about it, and it's been more than 5 years. Story 39. I was the customer. I had just moved from Boston to Ohio and asked our waitress for a fork. The waitress thought I was asking for something entirely different. After asking me to repeat my request, it became clear that she was really upset. I couldn't understand why she was so upset until the other members of our party explained that my accent caused certain words to sound different than what I intended. From then on, I always requested a four-pronged eating utensil instead of a fork. Story 40. Ketchup for their salmon. The owner of the restaurant's daughter was the server. This tall man, about 6 feet 7 inches, stood up and started screaming, "You forgot my ketchup! Where is the ketchup?" Disgusting. Story 41. Once, I worked at a stand that sold burgers and hot dogs. One customer wanted peanut butter and jelly on his hot dog, in addition to the slaw, chili, onions, mustard, and ketchup. We happened to have some, so I got it for him. He said it was the best thing ever. Story 42. I worked at a diner. It was a scrambled eggs and fake maple syrup kind of diner. A woman would come in and request freshly cracked pepper on her small iceberg lettuce salad. In West Virginia in the holler, she wanted us to freshly crack pepper on her $1.75 bowl of lettuce. Story 43. A middle-aged couple came into the cafe and wine bar where I worked in the early 2000s in the United Kingdom. It was a relatively new, fancy place back then and had a lovely atmosphere. I went to take their order, and the first thing the woman asked me was, "Can I turn off the background music? It's too distracting." There was a very low-level background ambience, and she wanted it turned off. I ended up turning it down further in her area until it was barely audible for her, but that request still frustrates me when I think about it now. Story 44. An older woman ordered the gazpacho soup and was extremely upset that it was cold. She asked the server to send it back to be heated. Story 45. As someone who worked in sushi restaurants for nearly 10 years, you will be surprised by how many people get upset when you serve them raw fish at the sushi restaurant. Story 46. One of the restaurants where I worked when I was younger had a salad bar that used plastic kale. A customer requested some after we saw them taking it out of the ice. Apparently, they couldn't tell it was metal and plastic. Story 47. Worked in a Mexican restaurant. A cowboy came in and asked for a silver bullet beer. I was like, "What?" Took a minute to figure out that he wanted Coors Light. Everyone calls it silver bullet, right? Story 48. Appledini, extra dirty. I was in the service bar and walked out to the table to make absolutely sure the server heard the order properly. The man had 4 of them, and it is even more vile than it sounds. Story 49. When I used to work at McDonald's, a customer ordered a Big Mac and asked for the meat to be medium rare. My brother in Christ, you do not want a McDonald's slab of meat to be medium rare. I did not have any control over the cooking other than placing it on the grill and pressing a button. Story 50. I had a customer who apparently had a very restrictive health diet. I spent about 15 minutes telling her all the ingredients in everything. She kept getting upset that we did not have United States Department of Agriculture certified organic produce, as we were not in the United States. She finally settled on a vegan salad bowl with numerous alterations. After reading out every ingredient, the kitchen made her food. She ate half of it, then brought it back and said, "I forgot that I was not going to eat rice anymore. Can you remake it without rice?" I simply said, "I am sorry that you forgot that, but you were informed of all ingredients." Story 51. We went out for pho once, Vietnamese soup. The lady at the table next to us asked for oyster soup crackers to put in her pho. The restaurant brought her a pile, so I guess it was not unusual for them, but I was mystified. Story 52. Someone asked if the vegan starter, as clearly identified on the menu, was in fact vegetarian. She was dining alone and was only asking for herself. The server gave me a look as if to say, "Did she really ask that?" Story 53. I worked at California Pizza Kitchen, and once a lady asked for a bowl of spaghetti bolognese without pasta, so a bowl of sauce. Another time, Someone ordered a half iced coffee and half cola. Story 54. I was a hostess at a fancy restaurant in the 1990s. As I was checking an older gentleman's coat, he asked me if my hair was real and if he could touch it. He was there with a woman in her 20s, and she was completely fine with his inappropriate question. This was before hair extensions became popular, so the question was even stranger than it would be today. Story 55. With a friend at Bob Evans in graduate school before classes. As we were getting ready to leave, a man came in and asked for 2 bowls of sausage gravy and a country time lemonade. The waitress asked how many biscuits he wanted. None. Just bring 2 bowls and a spoon. We left before we could watch that horror occur. Story 56. A customer came into the restaurant with a potato and asked us to microwave it with some cheese and butter. We did it because he was wealthy and tipped generously. Story 57. A customer argued that because our restaurant was attached to a hotel, we were required to help him schedule an escort. Story 58. As a bartender at an upscale bar in Atlanta, I had extensive knowledge of unusual drinks. It was the mid-1980s. I would often have someone walk up and order something like a 57 Chevy with red interior and Hawaiian license plates. A 57 Chevy is white cream de cacao and vodka. But what does the rest mean? Do not order a drink you made up at home. Story 59. A German friend was moving to the United States, and after clearing customs, she was hungry. At a restaurant, she ordered a ham and cheese sandwich. Story 60. I worked in a coffee shop, and a woman confidently asked us to make her a couple of hard-boiled eggs at 9 p.m. When we told her we could not do that, she became very angry. Story 61. I was at a Peruvian restaurant. The table behind me had 4 Asian women trying Peruvian food for the first time. When the ceviche arrived, they asked the server if it could be cooked. The menu did say it was cooked in lemon juice. The server explained, no, this is how it is supposed to be eaten. The table asked if they could microwave it for a few minutes because it was too cold. Story 62. I worked at a steakhouse and had a regular who would order a 10-ounce filet seasoned with salt and pepper. He wanted it raw. It literally never touched the broiler, and he wanted a bowl of ketchup on the side. He never batted an eye. Story 63. At Macaroni Grill, she wanted her chicken breast medium rare. She argued with my manager for 30 minutes, then was served medium rare chicken. Story 64. At a cocktail bar with some coworkers, one of them asked if she could order a non-alcoholic espresso martini that also had no caffeine. The server just looked at her before suggesting she order something else. Story 65. Not a restaurant, but a British pub. A man asked for half a pint of base bitter, a hand-pumped ale, in a pint glass, topped up with water. 25 years later, I still think, what the heck? Story 66. I was on a trip to Italy with a larger group. Since I can somewhat speak Italian, I was responsible for most communications. One member of the group was used to eating ketchup with all meals, so I was the one tasked with asking for ketchup. I had to do it several times a day for a week, and there were often strong emotions. Story 67. I would like a glass of water. Also, I want 10 or 11 lemons. Oh, and please bring real sugar. Haha. I charged them for the lemons. When they balked at the price, I asked, how much are lemons at your grocery store? Story 68. Black Sambuca sour cocktail. I was a pretty experienced bartender, and I had never heard of it before. When mixed with lemon juice, black Sambuca becomes a putrid snot green color and it tastes gross. Story 69. I had breakfast with a friend who ordered the chicken fried steak. When the meal arrived, she informed the server that something was wrong with it. It neither looked nor tasted like chicken. Story 70. Reading glasses. They were upset we did not have a pair for them at our small restaurant that is open 4 months out of the year. Story 71. Mine wasn't food. I was out to dinner at a franchise Mexican restaurant with a client, a wealthy white woman, and she asked the waitress, does anyone on the staff wear contact lenses and have saline solution? I need to adjust my contacts. The waitress actually returned with a small bottle of saline solution. I slipped her a generous tip discreetly because that was some entitled behavior if I had ever seen it. Story 72. My family and I stopped at a restaurant in Kansas and asked for a brandy and soda for my father one evening. Nobody in the restaurant knew what brandy was. I guess they thought our request for brandy was the strangest thing. Story 73. I was working at a Mexican restaurant in the kitchen when one of the servers came in holding back laughter. Apparently, someone had asked him on their first day learning Spanish with Duolingo for some dolphin milk. Story 74. Obligatory, not a restaurant, but one of my first jobs was working the bottle return counter at the local grocery store. One day, a man walked up and mumbled something. I apologized and said I didn't hear what he said. He mumbled again, slightly louder. I felt bad, like it was my problem, but I said, "I'm very sorry, sir. I can't understand what you're asking." The man went from quiet mumbling to shouting, "Condoms!" At first, naive me didn't get it, but once I did, I directed him to the pharmacy across the parking lot. Who goes to the bottle counter to get condoms? The best I could do was the top half of an old Sprite bottle, but make sure you keep the cap on. Story 75. I worked at Domino's, and I remember a customer asking for olives on a pizza. We sometimes had olives, but they were so rarely ordered that there was just one container of them, and they were never restocked because we hardly used them. At that time, we had no olives and had not restocked. For months. When I told him we didn't have olives, he went on a rant about how we could claim to be an authentic Italian pizza shop if we did not have olives. I replied, "This is Domino's. It is an American chain. There is an Italian pizza shop just down the road, but it is not Domino's." Story 76. I used to ask a local restaurant if they would make me a sloppy joe because they had an appetizer of fries covered in sloppy joe. Story 77. I was at a sushi restaurant and overheard from the table next to me, "So you don't have sashimi chicken?" Story 78. I feel like none pizza with left beef is really close. I mean, it is a machine giving the order, so it is not like the employees can ask for clarification. I saw where a customer at a breakfast place was upset that their egg had white stuff in it, saying that, "At McDonald's the eggs are all yellow." They were not understanding the answer, "This is real egg," to their confused inquiry. I have to say that egg with no white stuff in it takes the cake for me. Story 79. I had a customer ask for black coffee and water. I gave him a black coffee and water. He stared at me, confused, and said he wanted them mixed. I am aware of an Americano, but this was new to me. Story 80. I was in a subway once, and there was a family ahead of me in line. Mom, kid, and dad had fairly normal, unremarkable orders. Then Grandpa stepped up. I don't remember exactly which sandwich he ordered, but he said he wanted onions on it, only whole rings. The sandwich artist looked at him like, "What?" But then proceeded to start digging through the onions looking for whole onion rings to put on his sandwich. I turned to the people behind me and said, "We are never getting out of here." Story 81. My friend ordered a Negroni with a side of soda. The server misheard him, and without hesitation, she brought him a Corona with soda on the side. Story 82. Under easy eggs. I did sunny side up, then covered them at the end so the tops would cook. Pure guess. They weren't sent back. But was that actually what they meant? Still bothers me 10 years later. Story 83. How about a friend of mine? Okay, it was me. Asking for garlic bread because I wanted authentic garlic bread in a piazza in Florence, Italy. The waiters all looked confused. So I explained as best I could in broken English. With an "ah" like he finally understood. The waiter went away and 5 minutes later returned with a slice of white bread with 4 raw cloves of garlic sitting on it. He looked at me like an expectant puppy waiting for me to throw a ball to him. I looked at the plate, back at him, and said, "Perfect." When he left, my friends all dissolved into uncontrollable laughter. Story 84. In college, I was at a bar with some friends, and a buddy of mine ordered Baileys and Coke together. There was so much foam. Story 85. Me. Asking for brown gravy for my fries in Chicago. I swear it is totally normal to ask for that in Canada. Story 86. My mother consistently orders a deconstructed latte. She does not like strong flavors, but she loves red wine. She wants the milk in a glass and the espresso shot on the side so she can dip a teaspoon into it and drip a tiny amount of coffee into the milk. She insists she likes the taste of coffee despite refusing enough to actually taste it. I will not order anything for her in public anymore. Story 87. A customer in their mid-30s asked for ketchup and proceeded to empty the ramekin of ketchup into her carbonara and stir it in. Another customer asked where the bathroom was. I pointed to the pizza oven and said, "Left-hand side of the pizza oven." He went down the right-hand side toward the kitchen. When I redirected him, he said, "Oh, sorry, I thought you meant the pizza oven's left." From the point of view of the pizza oven looking out into the restaurant. I can't be sure he wasn't joking and just confused his left and right, but he seemed genuine in that explanation. Story 88. A customer would always come into the place where I worked and order a piece of fish and 6 chips, which are French fries. The first time he did this, I thought he was joking and did not bother counting exactly, so I gave him 7. He became very upset. Story 89. Not quite the same thing, but reading the comments triggered a memory. Many years ago, I asked the person serving me for a royal with cheese and was confused as to why the employee wasn't understanding me. I was in Burger King in London, United Kingdom. I do not know what I was thinking that day because even McDonald's here does not call it that. My siblings will never let me live that one down. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.